Get Ready to Rock Radio.
This is Pete Feenstra, GetReadyToRock.com, talking to Steve Hackett, composer, guitarist, and for over 30 years a solo recording artist.
Yeah, it's been a long time, isn't it? Yes, solo.
People often hold back to your original career, but in fact, how many albums have you done now?
Oh God, it's getting on for nearly 50. I think it's about 47 albums or so, but it's with Genesis and post that time, of course, and one that I did before I joined Genesis. So,
yes.
Yeah, I've got them coming out of my... Yeah.
But we're here to talk about Tunnel of the Mouth, which is the brand new album,
Yep.
which you recorded in your living room in
That's right.
Twickenham,
Yep.
which we'll talk about in a moment. But I'd like to go back to the early days, just to start with, if I may.
Yep.
You said in that Melody Maker advert all those years ago, before you joined Genesis, that you were determined to strive beyond existing stagnant music forms. I'm wondering if that's still a driving force for you.
It is. It's a funny thing. In the days when I was with Genesis, we didn't realise that what we were doing was eventually going to be called progressive music. We just thought we were making songs.
Yes.
And some of them were very long. Some of them went on a whole side of an album. But some of them were just 3 minutes long. So there wasn't any kind of preconception about it. But I was definitely interested in working with a band that were going to incorporate aspects of classical stuff and jazz and orchestra and not just be, a three-chord trick, really. So that's my roots.
Yeah. Excellent. It's also, you also you've more or less had a propensity for musical extremes, if I may say so, and that seems to be the case on the new record as well. Or you've certainly not lost that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Where does that come from?
It's a very good word, isn't it? I am a musical extremist. I can be negotiated with, unlike terrorists, but well, with the guitar alone, I always look for the corners of the instrument, really, and try to make it sound very often not like the guitar and be recognisable. And again, back in the Genesis days, they didn't really want a hero to play with them. They wanted accompaniment and little bits of shading and bits of delicacy. So
which you became very well known for, of course.
Well, I did that, but they wanted someone who could play acoustic guitar as much as electric, and so I love 12-string work and I love nylon, and I really love all music, which makes me a kind of mongrel, really, as well as an extremist, and I just can't sit still. All right, there's a track like Still Waters, which is basically the nearest thing to a straight blues track.
Gospel blues.
But yeah, it was slight sort of gospel influence. But if I'd have done a whole album of that, I suspect people that have bought other albums, fans, would probably say, yeah, but what about your other stuff? And what about this? And what about that? So whenever I've tried to channel it into one direction, people always say, well, yeah, but the real you means you sort of do this kind of travelogue and go to lots of different places, and we want to go there with you, hopefully.
I'd like to go back to the quote about probably the best album ever recorded in the Twickenham living room, which you said. As a consequence of that, though, is the album greatly influenced by the use of the technology that was used to record it?
Well, it is, yeah. It's in a way, it's harder to play live albums that have grown up in the computer. I always think albums that were written in rehearsal rooms, and I don't mean to call that an outmoded institution, even though we've got the technology that allows you to bypass that. Things that are designed in the computer, whereas at one time you would have gone, we've got two tracks, the band on one, vocals on the other, or the guitar on the other. Now it's limitless, and I got up to, not with this album, but its predecessor, I got up to about 212 tracks on one track, because we had three different rhythm sections at one point, and a sort of big brass band and an orchestra and this and that, and so there are no limits, really. I can't help it, and the guy that I work with, Roger King, even though sometimes I'll try and do something, I think it's a very simple track, and he'll say to me, it's eaten up all the computer memory and we're on to something else, hang on until I sort that out. So we're always up against whatever technology has been available, whether it was 24-track or a synclavier or any kind of thing like this. We've always pushed it to the limit.
Did you establish a kind of working relationship with Roger in advance?
Well, Roger and I have done lots and lots of different albums together, so and lots of different styles. So he's just been great. Of course, he's a total genius. He's a kind of mixture of J.S. Bach, a wonderful engineer. He's kind of like my George Martin in a way. Arrangements are done on the back of an envelope and it's there and immediate.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we flesh them out on computer and then get people in to do it. But it means that you end up turning sketches or demos into
The real thing.
the real thing. Yeah, the real thing with real people.
And you've always seemed to be interested in concept of sounds and moods as much as you have of song structures. And you seem to have carried that into the new album again.
Yeah,
You've got a feeling of movement in there and different changing moods and nuances.
yes, I think there might be one track like Emerald and Ash where we started out with the idea of a little bit of Russian ballet orchestration, very, very light,
Yeah.
as light as a souffle, little tinkles and little noises in order to set that kind of Swan Lake-like beginning to a song that talks about, something that you think's love that's gone astray and gone awry and been had, blah, 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 the femme fatale.
Right.
And I've got also Anthony Phillips, who was my predecessor in Genesis, on 12-string on that. So that goes through a number of moods, and it's basically a ballad, and then it goes demonic right at the end of it.
Get ready to rock radio.
On the press for the new record, you've also said I've made a lack of an identifiable style my calling card, and yet really, tongue of the mouth, you've got prog in there, you've got fusion in there, world music, classical music, blues we've talked about, and surely that is your style. It's the fact what you mentioned earlier, the fact that you move from one to the other, but actually do it within one song as well as the whole album.
Yes, sometimes within whole songs. Tony Stratton-Smith used to say, it was both my strength and my weakness, the fact that I would do that. But at the end of the day, I always figured you have to take people on a journey with a song, and they were almost like films for the ear rather than the eye. Certainly in a sort of pre-video era, and people say, the music is very, very visual. But then, of course, I grew up in the '60s, and you've got endless amounts of colour coming out of the music then.
Right, yeah.
When people were buying, you go along to a shop that sold washing machines, and in a back room you'd find a cardboard box with a bunch of albums all slung together, and that was how music was sold. It's laughable now, isn't it?
It's completely changed.
Yeah.
But do you think sometimes that you have to lead your audience to literally lead them to new aspects of music? Obviously, you're exploring all this stuff.
Yeah.
Are you ahead of your audience? That's the question.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean,
classical would be the
classical,
works
yeah.
would be a
No,
classical.
I like to think I haven't forced classical down anyone's throats. Really, I think I've done some classical albums, and if people want to buy that, that's fine. But then I've done things where I've mixed it and used nylon guitar, introductions to things like Blood on the Rooftops, and Horizons. But I suppose again, in an era like the '60s, where bands like Jethro Tull, obviously a lot of these bands, Richard Thompson, Airport Convention, you had guys who had one foot in folk and they had a foot in classical, and even if they weren't trained, there was a lot of respect for all these different forms and all
genres.
These different sounds, different genres. Yeah, acoustic music, although I absolutely love it, you can only take it up to a certain energy level. It seems to me. Yeah. But there's obviously there's a whole world in that, and I'm not denigrating it. I wouldn't dream of decrying it. When I first heard Segovia playing acoustic guitar,
who you paid homage to, of course.
I have paid homage to, and
what was the name of that album again?
Segovia Plays Bach.
Yes.
That one.
Yes.
Yeah, I did an album called Tribute. It was kind of Segovia Plays Bach. The album that I did, which was originally going to be, going to be dedicated to him, was called Tribute, and then I dedicated it to a whole bunch of composers that I love.
Get ready to rock radio.
It's got a very strong melody before that, of course.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it's got a strong melody. Yeah, it's funny you would say that. I loved Procol Harum, and I think if ever a band used orchestra well,
it was them.
And had unusual lyrics, all sorts of things. I love Procol and Gary's voice, of course.
And you mentioned the amazing range of sounds that you get from the guitar, and of course you do that again on the track called Tubehead, where the guitar almost sounds like a keyboard and all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, again, I think where I got on board in about 1971 when I first started making professional albums, we used to do this thing whereby we thought, wouldn't it be great if people couldn't tell what was keyboard and what was guitar? And that became the calling card, I think. I used to do it with Tony Banks. We used to twin lead things and play fast together with tapping. And that was the guitar
champion, of course.
That's right. Yes, I was in love with that idea. Again, I know I seem to be harping back to the early days of Genesis, but when I first heard an album that they'd done before I joined, which was Trespass, I listened to this sound and I couldn't tell if it was keyboards or guitars, and I found out later that it was maybe 3 or 4 12 strings all playing at once. And when they're all tinkling away, and some of them are put through Leslie cabinets and mic'd up differently, it sounded like a little sort of little orchestra of harpsichords, and it was a sound that the band had. And so I continued that line. So when I first joined them, and we did this track called Musical Box, I thought, no one's making the sound of a musical box. I could do that with very speed guitar, slow it down to half speed, play it very slowly, speed it up, and it's all very tinkly and all those little gentle sounds that, I guess I don't think the guitar is all about screaming. I mean, I like to torture it too and make it wail, but
it's almost a role of
much more.
Producer, in fact.
Funny that, isn't it? Yeah, I used to think that Genesis needed a producer in the early days, and I took it upon myself to say all sorts of things that I if I'd have thought about keeping my job, I would have kept my mouth shut. But I thought maybe they'll respect me for trying to make it stronger. So I had nil diplomacy in those days, and I just used to, if I saw something was wrong, I used to say, I think we could make this better. Right. And I thought I was only going to stay for about a year. I thought I'll stay for a year and then I'll get the boot. And I ended up staying for maybe 6 or 7.
Get ready to rock radio.
And I think in those days, in a pre-punk sort of era, where musicians used to basically embrace everything rather than try and tear it all down, I think it was
interesting. Yeah.
Well, it was. It's not like my team's great, the rest are crap, Yabu sucks. It was very much... And also, you see, I used to listen to Bach and Blues and the MJQ and...
Modern Jazz Quartet, that's about a few years.
That's right, it is. But, that attracted a lot of attention at that time, the idea of player-based mediums. I mean, it's just as healthy, I think, to be a blues player as it is, because it's a player-based medium. I
quite
think.
So.
Even though you say that's very simple music, but then Bach, plainly, is probably the most complicated music that anyone can do. It's nice to try and embrace it all, I think.
Again, getting back to the new record, we've talked about different styles within one song, let alone the whole album. Fire on the Moon is an example of that. It starts that kind of quiet, loud dichotomy.
Yep.
Really interesting dynamic. Quick change of tempos, different guitar textures. And there's also the kind of things like Nomads, which is a very interesting piece. It's very impressionistic. You've got this feeling of landscapes and movement. Is that kind of what you were thinking of when you did that?
Yeah, with that one, in fact, I was writing the lyrics to that with Jo, my partner, and she was saying to me, I went to these caverns, in Andalusia, where the gypsies played and danced, and she said, why don't you say in the lyric, I'll take you to the caverns, and I thought, well, that's too specific. And then I tried doing it, and I tried singing it, and it worked very, very well as something sung. So it was, a romance of place again, and the whole flamenco idea that you get this tremendous energy from that whole kind of world of dance and and music. And then I thought, but I don't want to sit still there. So what I'm going to do is establish all of that, the beachhead of all of that, and the dancers and the stomping and the hand claps and the castanets. But beneath the blur of all that, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if then it goes up a notch to another level of energy and goes electric, and you get this drum kit steaming in.
Get ready to rock radio.
I'd like to go back to some of your previous work as well.
Sure.
Just briefly, because we're going to play some of these tracks on the show. When you recorded Please Don't Touch, which was a departure, would you say it was a departure from what people expected from you at the time?
Well, I was trying...
At that stage of your career?
Yeah, I think...
high-tech pop, I suppose.
High-tech, maybe it was, yeah. I was trying to do something that was very different from the stuff I'd done with Genesis. I wasn't trying to make a progressive album. I wasn't trying to do something that was too gothic.
No.
Yeah, there are pop songs on it, and moments of sort of loungy jazz, and the odd love song.
Yeah.
But that's when I'd sort of hit on the idea of trying to make every song very different to every other song. And I thought perhaps another team or another group can play each track. I suspect that at the time it didn't go down quite as well as the first solo thing that I'd done. So the thing that changed that was forming a band, going out playing that material, because plainly I couldn't have all those special guests go out and tour. So anyone who's thinking of making an album, departing the usual sort of band, and they're going to work with all these famous pals, you think, you can do that, but then can you tour it? So you immediately run into identity crisis after that.
Spectral Mornings, would you say that was the album that defined your style at that time?
Yeah, I still...
Stepping out as a solo artist and developing your own career?
I tell you what it was, I think having my own band and realising that this band had managed to play material from stuff that they'd never played on before, and then I thought it was their chance to try and impress themselves on the album. So once the shackles were off, they were allowed to be themselves. I mean, a lot of them were very, very funny, had a great sense of humour, lots and lots of ideas, and we just had this incredible party in Holland, where it was freezing with frozen lakes, and we were completely out of our brains the whole time. But it sounds like a very cohesive, and it's a very happy memory for me. We partied and we made music at the same time.
Get ready to rock radio.
The effect was pretty much the same.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much.
At that time. And following on from that, of course, by 81 you did Cured.
Yeah.
Now, was that actually a stab at commercial success? Was that the...
Well, I think
the record company leaning on you at that point?
I think that yes, the record company were leaning on me, and I was having to sort of justify myself at that point, and also finances were tight.
Right.
So I made an album that maybe I would say I would probably distance myself from that quite a lot now and say that's not the kind of album I would make now. Although the similarity is that it was made basically by a two-man team, and occasionally we got in other people, rather like the latest one, but technology has moved on so much that...
absolutely, which brings us back to the new record, of course.
It's different, and there are loads of people on the new album.
But of course, the thing we have to think about is the actual environment that you're recording all these things, the fast-changing music scene, the changing technology, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And in that respect, till we have Faces...
Yeah,
which had kind of Brazilian influence. Of course, you were down in Brazil when you recorded some of that, I think. Yeah. Were you disappointed with the response to that when you put it out?
Well, I was signed to Lamborghini Records for a couple of albums, and then it ended up getting sold on from deal to deal as a catalogue item. But it kind of touched on world music, and then Pete Gabriel phoned me up and said, I guess you're Mr. Brazil, so where should I go if I want to go and record down there? And I put him in touch with one or two people. But, we had the equivalent of a samba school. I don't know if you're familiar with this expression, samba school, where they have hundreds of drummers, literally, all playing in the carnival, but they create that in studios as well by overdubbing. But, the emphasis is on the drum, and that was really what that album was all about, really.
And of course, after that, you formed a supergroup, GTR. I think that's the chronology of it, and got your good profile in the States. and yet it was a project that you seemed to walk away from, relatively speaking, quite quickly.
Well, I think that there are several things. We had a hit album in the States, a bankrupt company in England.
Right.
And also, I think when two guys that are well known come together to do something, it has novelty value. And I didn't understand this back in the days of Blind Faith. I couldn't understand why there was only one album made. We thought they got to ride off into the sunset together. Yeah. But of course, from the inside, you realise what all those pressures are. Whatever position that album reaches in the charts, that's going to define where it goes after that. So yeah, we had an album that got to number 11 in the American charts. Couldn't quite get it into the top 10, but it was a gold album nonetheless. And lots of great jam sessions with Steve Howe. Lots of it didn't make it onto the record. We started working on it in 1984, 85, it came out in 86, I think. And when you're immediately corporately answerable to your sponsors, and in our case it was Clive Davis and Arista Records, who did a phenomenal job of breaking the album in the States, but at the same time there was that feeling of, you can't just do what you want, so maybe not both hands tied, but one hand tied behind the back.
Okay. And you followed that with a classical guitar album, Momentum, and you said at the time it wasn't designed with marketing in mind, and I wonder if there's always been that tension between what you actually wanted to do and what your label at the time wanted you to do.
Well, there were certain eras where, as I say, around about GTR time, not just the band that I was in, but all the bands. Yeah. Basically, there was this emphasis on suddenly it was the single is everything, the album is nothing.
Again, you started that environment.
Yeah, exactly. I started out life as an albums artist. That was what people wanted to sign, and suddenly, you've got a character act into something else. But in a way, I wanted to do something which was less driven by all those considerations. So there are no props. It's just back to the guitar, and that's what I've done. Every now and again, I've stripped it right back to the guitar. So you say, okay, if you think I'm a sort of what's the word you were saying? Excess creature of excess. I don't think I'm.
And I think also around about that time you did Feedback 86, but it didn't actually come out for another 10 years now.
Yeah, I know. It was
all-star project.
Yeah, it was an all-star project that eventually saw the light of day. Practically a decade or more after it had been put together. But that's just
the problems of having different people on the album and getting them signed up.
Well, the politics of the fact that. Again, that was created in an era before artists had their own labels. So there's always this aspect of no matter how long you've been in the business, you've got a choice. Either you go auditioning your ideas to multinationals or even independent labels, or you do it yourself. So, you be your own A&R man, and all you've got to do is please the immediate team that make that record.
And then you did your blues album, Blues with a Feeling, which was a very enjoyable diversion. Is it true that you once saw Paul Butterfield playing in Twickenham?
I did, to about 20 people.
Incredible.
Are you a Butterfield fan?
Oh, absolutely, East-West, yeah.
East-West is fabulous.
Seminole.
And what an incredible harmonica player who gave every guitarist a run for his money, that fantastic distorted harmonica thing with all those vibratos and bends. And the funny thing is, he used to jam after hours with Jimi Hendrix. No one ever thought of recording it. No. It's amazing, isn't it? That there was so much there, that whole clique of Dylan and Mike Bloomfield.
Yeah, Mike Bloomfield, great.
And Elvin Bishop and Paul Butterfield.
Elvin's still around, of course.
It was a most incredible gig, if I could wax eloquent about that. Yeah. Because most bands that would be on stage playing basically it was like an enlarged pub, the Eel Pie Hotel. There were only about 20 people there. But the show they put on, oh my God, they just
as if it was Wembley.
Floored everybody. Yeah. As if it was Wembley. If only Wembley had ever seen anything that great ever in its life.
And almost true to form, you went off on it in different tangents again and did the incredible A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah.
That was a big step up, I guess, as your role as a composer. Did you feel it was a daunting project at the time, or was it one that you had on the back boiler for quite a
Again,
while?
it was stuff that I'd had on the shelf for about 10 years, and then suddenly EMI were interested in doing something. And all those ideas, I realised I could orchestrate them and probably talk them into it if there was a concept. And every time I'd done an acoustic piece, I kept thinking, Midsummer Night's Dream would be nice for this. No, Shakespeare's done it, you can't do that, it's been had. But then I thought, well, why not do the whole
story?
Do the whole story, do the whole thing and make that work. And luckily they bought that and it worked for Classic FM. It's very nice, they got behind it. And
which of course it started not long before that. So it was
exactly, yeah, so it was right, that's that funny thing, you can be right at the wrong time, but if you hit the zeitgeist,
yes.
You can do well with something that the previous week people were saying, forget it, mate, you're not going to happen.
Darktown, moving on swiftly, was a very personal and autobiographical record, I guess. Again, with A Labour of Love, was that again one you had on the back burner for a while, or was that something you needed to do there and then?
Yeah, I think some of the tracks have been around for 5 years or so, like The Golden Age of Steam. I didn't know where to put that because I was auditioning to labels that were saying, well, whatever age I was then, I'll tell you, I'm 59 now, but then back in the sort of 90s, people are saying, well, he's been around for a bit, whatever else you can be, you can never be new.
Right.
Obviously, if you've got your own label, you're not really running into all that sort of all those problems. I'm a perennial act. I always come back for more. Glutton for punishment. I just love it too much.
There was a 4-year gap before To Watch the Storms.
Yeah.
Which was with studio albums, and then you did Metamorphosis, or Metamorphosis, I must pronounce that correctly, which again was a hugely ambitious piece, nylon string, guitar and orchestra.
Yeah.
I guess it followed on from Summer Night's Dream in some respects.
Yeah, in a way that I think of them as twinned together because they're about the same thing, which is nylon guitar and orchestra, which always sounds great. I mean, if you think of Concerto de Aranjuez and Rodrigo and all of that, and even if you're not familiar with that music, if you listen to Classic FM, any one particular day you'll hear it 4 times a day because it's so popular. Yeah. So there's that sort of thing. I mean, and I always noticed, I must say, that whenever there was something with nylon guitar and strings going, I noticed that usually women would say, "This is beautiful. I love this kind of music." So, it's always been a seductive.
And that's for the women, and almost for the guys. You came up with Wild Orchids, where you started shredding again.
Well, that's the funny thing, isn't it? I think most of my audience is blokes. So for some reason, I come up with all this romantic music that blokes really like. So maybe it's that not being afraid of your feminine side.
Well, there's plenty of everything in the new record. I think it's the one that really does define you. I mean, Spectral Mornings set you on the path all those years ago, and I think you've come. And hopefully this will open lots more doors, Steve.
I really hope so, thank you.
You're going to do a tour, when does that start?
Yeah, well, it's already started, to be honest, but we are doing a British tour around November in this country.
What's the date for the Shepherd's Bush Empire?
November the 14th.
November the 14th.
Yeah.
This is Pete Feenstra, GetReadyToRock.com. It's been a pleasure talking to
Yeah,
Steve
you too,
Hackett.
Pete. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And goodbye.
Get ready to rock radio.
Music you want to hear.
The future of classic rock radio here today. Sounds good to me.
This is Get Ready to Rock Radio.